Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Lena Masri. I'm the CARE National Litigation Director and General Counsel. Are you all ready to talk about movement lawyering? All right, the session is titled Strategy Track, Leveraging the Law for Movement Wins. MashaAllah, we have such fascinating panelists today, a wealth of experience combined, and super exciting conversation. I'm going to start with my left, Abd Ayoub. He serves as the national, my right. He serves as the National Executive Director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, the largest Arab American civil rights organization in the United States. Appointed in August 2022 after more than a decade as ADC's National Legal and Policy Director, he leads the organization's day-to-day operations and works with the board to shape strategic growth and grassroots advocacy. Kari is a human rights attorney and the executive director of Project Taha, a legal nonprofit. In her leadership role, she spearheads strategic pro bono litigation, most notably co-leading the defense of Dr. Afia Siddiqui, working on the evacuation of Americans from Gaza, several First Amendment lawsuits, including CARE's lawsuit, on behalf of Mahmoud Khalil against Colombia, defending journalists facing transnational repression from foreign governments, and co-authoring 3 amicus briefs in CCR's genocide litigation. Noah Barron is the Assistant Director of Litigation at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, where he uses litigation to protect and advance the civil rights of Asian Americans and to promote a fairer society. Noah brings a broad background in civil rights litigation with particular expertise in the Voting Rights Act, the First Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. Marium Uddin serves as the legal director of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, bringing over 2 decades of legal experience that includes roles as an assistant district attorney in Dallas County, a public defender, and a United States immigration judge. Her career has been shaped by a commitment to finding justice through the law, driven by early emotional resonance with global tragedies in places like Bosnia and Rwanda. Noah, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
AAJC has used litigation to challenge discriminatory barriers in voting and immigration. What case stands out as a model for turning the courtroom into systemic change?
So we've had a lot of cases, but it feels like I'm bragging a little bit to identify anyone in particular as the model for systemic change. I think that one of our cases challenging the birthright citizenship litigation or executive order is I'm particularly proud of that one. One of the notable, there are of course a number of other cases, but a notable aspect of that one I think is our use of experts on the history of the 14th Amendment and the 1866 Civil Rights Act, because knowing our judicial audience and the prevalence of originalism, we thought it would be useful to not just have what is derogatorily called law office history, but to have actual experts provide reports and to have those as actual findings of fact by the judge, not just legal conclusions which can be overturned on appeal. So I think that we're still waiting on our motion for summary judgment, but one of the advantages of moving for summary judgment rather than a preliminary injunction is that we can have those findings of fact, and that on appeal we can rest on those findings of fact that cannot be so easily overturned.
Maria, what factors drive your decision to file impact litigation versus pursuing policy advocacy first?
So, assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you all. To answer that question, I think I'll go back to pre-October 2023 when I was working with individuals a lot of asylum cases, a lot of SIJS cases, which is children walking across the border to be reunified with their parents, a lot of survivors of domestic violence, handling those cases. After October 2023 is when I filed my first federal court lawsuit against the then Biden administration. And the reason that I pivoted was because what I saw was sort of systemic discrimination across the board, which made it necessary to get into the space of what we call impact litigation and also movement lawyering, which we'll get into a little bit more. What prompted that work was we saw right after October 7th, the US government mobilized all its resources to get Americans out of Israel on Disney cruise ships. Meanwhile, a few hundred miles down the coast, Americans in Gaza and their loved ones were dodging bombs that their tax dollars paid for. So we began filing these lawsuits, and it did the trick. We got 86 Americans home. And so from there, you know, alhamdulillah, and from there, what started was this sort of movement of getting these clients and their stories into court. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of that you mentioned in the bio was CCR's genocide litigation, which I co-authored 3 amicus briefs on, in which we told the stories of some of these people who would otherwise just be stats and figures of harm suffered and people maimed and people killed. And it's been historical, right, to hear the stories of Palestinians in US federal courts. So to answer your question, to me that is what stands out the most about impact litigation and the importance of having these plaintiffs who, you know, the work we do is not amazing. The plaintiffs are incredible. Our clients are incredible. Their life stories, their lived experiences are so harrowing. But without attorneys and advocates and activists, they wouldn't get that day in court or before the media. So that's what's important to me.
Okay, and Abed, this is something you probably deal with on a day-to-day basis with civil rights organizations, just to continue from where Maria left off. What have you learned about balancing rapid response, movement lawyering versus long-term precedent setting?
Thank you, and thank you, Kari, for having us. But before I answer, I do want to recognize there are a number of great attorneys doing this work. I don't know, but here is with us from CCR. I mean, they've been doing such an incredible job. So please, let's give them a round of applause. I mean, the work and leadership, you know, he's shown and that organization have shown not just now, but after the, you know, Patriot Act, post 9/11 litigation. I mean, they've been there from the start. So really respect the work you do, and you guys are mentors, and we really value your work. So thank you again. Appreciate you. Thank you, and all the other attorneys in the crowd. I mean, thank you also for what you do. This isn't an easy time to be a lawyer, and there are a lot of things to balance, particularly at our organization. I mean, we do provide the direct services, the rapid response. And there's always conversations about, well, do we really want to get into the direct services? Should we pull out of it? But we know you could bring the greatest impact litigation case, but if you don't answer the phone of, like, you know, Hassan calling you at like 6 o'clock p.m. because her son is stopped at an airport and you can't help her, the community's going to hear about it by like 8 p.m. So you gotta, you know, we gotta serve them. This is why people contribute to ADC. This is why they're involved with us, is because they look at us as, you know, they're defenders. They can lean on us when they need the help, when they need the support. So for us, it's, you know, a combination of things. We'll once a week or every few weeks, we'll take a look at the number of individual cases that come in. We'll use data, we'll use trends, we'll determine, like, okay, if we have X amount of cases coming from this state or coming from this jurisdiction, then we know there's something going on, so we'll dig a little deeper. And most of the time, it's these individual cases lead to impact litigation. So if somebody, I think an example with Kari, you know, with the Texas case and the, you know, the BDS, anti-BDS language, I mean, that came from an individual teacher or client saying, I can't sign this contract. And then that became an impact case. So that's usually how it works. And it's a balance. It's difficult. We are expanding our department now and starting to separate the attorneys that handle the direct and the rapid response and picking up that 2 a.m. phone call, and then those that are just focused on, you know, 3, 4, 5 impact litigations per year. And the final thing I'll note is this: I think we are, as a lawyering community within within our space, it's a lot different now than it was post 9/11. We have so many young lawyers, so many experienced attorneys now from within that are picking up the issues. So there is not necessarily a need to lean on other national civil rights groups or attorneys from outside of our community. That expertise is within, and I love seeing that. I love seeing, young attorneys like yourself coming in, and, Maria's done an incredible job working with us on a number of cases. We want to volunteer, we want to do work. That didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. So it's great seeing it work that way, and it takes off some of the pressure from us as ADC and helps us get involved in more cases, as we move along. Thank you.
Marium, mashallah, you bring experience from both the bar and the bench. What advice would you give attorneys that are handling emergency hearings, particularly in the immigration context?
Assalamu alaikum to everybody, and I also want to say thank you to CARE for hosting an incredible event. It has been such a privilege to be here and get to know many of the luminaries. I think that's the word that Ramsey had used. I also feel like we've got the best panel, at least the most good-looking one, and I want to thank Lena especially for her very comforting maternal words to me. I am not a gifted or natural speaker. I want to really preface my comments with that because I feel a little nervous to be up here and certainly unworthy of it. So I hope my words resonate in truth and that someone can take something away from all of our comments and use it for good. With that, to your question on emergency bond hearings and habeas, we're obviously seeing that unfold in real time almost every day. And the best tactic on that, I was on a panel for Freedom of the Press Foundation because Mario Guevara is a journalist who was detained and did a lot of local reporting for underserved communities. One of the things that I think is a commonality for us, understanding that immigrants, being among the most vulnerable of populations, and people who are outspoken, at the intersection of that is where the government is targeting us. It's a really, really smart play. And so for us as attorneys, having always been on the back foot, having always operated from a reactionary space, it is so essential for our success at this time to harness our collective power. That's what this conference symbolizes to me. And to have a rapid response plan ready to go. Have friends. Coalition building, allyship has never been more important than it is today. And I think everyone has echoed those comments, so I'm not saying anything brilliant. But specifically, it's very helpful to know the law. And right now in the immigration world, in the summer, Acting Director Leons from ICE had issued a memo to DHS and other agents, kind of giving them the green light. Anyone who's entered without inspection is going to be subject to mandatory detention. That went against 28 years of established precedent. And it shows you how policy is so influential on the law. It's not one arm and a separate arm. They are in tandem, and we've got to attack them in tandem. Understanding that, subsequently there was a Board of Immigration Appeals decision that basically stripped immigration judges of the right to make these decisions, saying people who have entered without inspection, commonly known as EWIs, would be subject to mandatory detention. So reinforcing the rule that had already been established by DHS. And I think it's also important to understand that this is a multi-pronged agency effort to defeat us, right? We're looking at DHS, housing ICE. We're looking at the Department of Justice. I was a little offended when Ramsey got up here and he was like, immigration judges just rubber stamp the administration's policies. But it's true, and is probably why I'm no longer an immigration judge. So the DOJ and EOI are under that, EOIR being an extension of law enforcement in a sense, right? We're housing the infrastructure of the administrative policy. And our top diplomat, Marco Rubio, at the Department of State, weighing in on all of this because, of course, visas are under his purview. So when you consider that 3 of our executive departments, 3 of 15 basically, 1/5 of the government is slotted to defeating what we intend to overcome, that's a lot to overcome. So when we go through the immigration process, USCIS is kind of at the bottom, a benefits conferring agency for the most part. Green cards, work permits, that kind of thing. Family petitions. Above that would be the immigration courts. And the immigration courts, as I said, are an extension of law enforcement. And above the immigration courts, of course, are the federal courts. I mean, immigration courts, you can go up through the BIA, the Board of Immigration Appeals. But ultimately, the government will do a lot of forum shopping and figure out where they're going to have the most favorable rulings from federal courts, knowing that that's where people like us are going to take them. So understanding all of that, and that this is all built on a campaign promise to enact the largest mass deportation in history, and understanding that there is an informal policy of 3,000 ICE pickups per day, in addition to third country removals, people that have no ties to Sudan or wherever it may be, being deported there. And a big, beautiful bill, don't laugh, Noah. It is big, and it is a bill. Saying to us, we're going to triple ICE's budget. You put all of those factors into consideration, and what you have, you look through this prism and you say, holy shit. And then you say to yourself, okay, so where do I go with rapid response? I can go through the immigration courts, understanding that they may rubber stamp the administration's policies. I really need to position myself more favorably in federal court, and habeas takes a lot of work. You gotta figure out where that person is. You're looking at sub-housing, a temporary restraining order, and you need a team. So I guess my real takeaway, having said all of that, is, let me look at my notes. I've never actually won a case based on charm, intelligence, or being a good speaker. I've always, if I've ever won, it's been because I'm super hardworking. So I took a lot of notes, and I wrote, organize quickly and find your friends. Don't clap, please.
Abed, I think this question is on everyone's mind. Outside the immigration context, what new legal threats do you anticipate in the next 1 to 2 years, and how should movement lawyers prepare?
That's a great question. I think the obvious one is First Amendment. The First Amendment issues and the silencing of our community's voices in every space. And just look at after 10/7, when people began protesting, they started saying that they were anti-Semitic. They started attacking them. When people began the college encampments, the same thing. When people began speaking up at work, they started to get them fired. The underlying motive for all their actions is to silence people. It's to go after their right to speak, their right to express themselves. And the intersection of this came with Mahmoud Khalil's case, is we see this immigration enforcement based on speech, based on views, and the attack on our First Amendment rights, the attack on our expression, the attack to speak freely, it's coming, and we really have to be prepared for that, and we have to work with attorneys from other communities, from across the political spectrum. I'll tell you one thing, the outreach we've had from conservative or moderate groups on First Amendment issues was surprising. I think this administration underestimated how valuable and how much value Americans have for the First Amendment. After Mahmoud Khalil, I have a funny story to tell. After Mahmoud Khalil was detained, I received a call from someone in Texas, older white guy, who was screaming into the phone that he doesn't like our people and doesn't care much for us, but will, he's like, I'll defend anything, I'll defend your right to speak. And then he goes, son, you know why we have the Second Amendment? And I go, no, why? He's like, well, to protect the First. I'm like, okay, Skip, let's make this happen, man. But he offered to come out to the office and stand guard, but really it told me they really value the First Amendment. It is coming under attack. It's coming under attack, again, in public spaces. It's coming under attack online with the media companies, with TikTok and Facebook, and it's all around First Amendment. We have to be prepared. And then our community members need to understand when their First Amendment rights are under attack, when you are being targeted for your speech. Like, you know, you may be let go of your job or suspended, and it may not ring right away that, oh man, it's because I posted something, right? So you have to dig in a little deeper, you have to ask the questions. But this is the route and the direction, and you're gonna start seeing a lot more, at least from our end, activity around this. We've hired a new legal director with First Amendment litigation experience. That's gonna be our focus, at least for the next 2 to 3 years on that front. Thank you.
Can I
No,
just
let's-
add, oh, I'm so sorry,
Oh,
yeah.
no, go
yeah.
for it.
I wanted to add a point to each of your comments. So with immigration and habeas, I think you're completely right on having a team because habeas requires a lot of work. So this was, I think, a lot of immigration attorneys and attorneys in general will agree that this is our first time really dabbling with habeas for most of us. And I've done a few, and one of the most extraordinary things that I saw was a complete breakdown of sort of that division of powers that we learn about in school, right? So I'll give you an example. We had a stateless Palestinian girl who's been living here since the age of 8, and she's married to a U.S. citizen. She gets picked up after she's coming back from the Virgin Islands, which is a U.S. territory, from her honeymoon, and gets detained for about 5 months. And at one point, before we were brought onto the case, they attempted to deport her in the middle of the night to the border of Israel, quote unquote. That was where the ICE officer told her she was going. So, you know, you file an emergency habeas, and I remember after that habeas was in place, and we had a temporary restraining order where the federal district judge said she's not to be moved from the district. I told her husband, like, you haven't been sleeping. It's been months and months of this. Get some sleep. We have this habeas in place. We have a TRO in place. They're not going to try to move her again. And literally that night at 5 a.m., and luckily I have toddlers, so I'm up at odd hours, my phone is blowing up, and they attempted again, in defiance of a federal judge's order, to move her. And that's the reality of what we're dealing right now. Like, that's a level of lawlessness, right? And similar situation out of one that we worked with Kari Houston. John Floyd is here, who is an excellent attorney and a mentor to me. And we dealt with a situation where a young Palestinian man lands here. He's got a valid green card, and they detained him at the Houston airport. You know, where you go in for secondary inspection. A lot of Muslims are familiar with that place. It's like a waiting room. They kept him there for 8 days, right? Sitting in the same clothes without access to food, water, a prayer space, a bed. So even though we are rushing around the clock to get these court orders to stop them from detaining and deporting people in the middle of the night, and why the middle of the night, right? That's when courts are closed, that's when lawyers are not available, family members might not be sitting by their phone, it's all by design. So that's one point I wanted to make to, like, the struggles that we're seeing with habeas in practice. And then, of course, you mentioned the big, beautiful bill. It's going to be the new fiscal year in October. There's going to be billions more that get injected into ISIS funding. We're going to see more detentions. We're going to see more masked men abducting people off the street, and that's the reality of it. Right now, there's almost 60,000 people being detained in ICE facilities across this country. And these facilities are not, some of them are remote, so that, you know, it impedes access to attorneys and family members, but some of them are just nestled in between, like, the Ross and TJ Maxx and Whole Foods. Like, you'll drive by one, and they're just human beings stacked in there like sardines in the most deplorable conditions. People are literally dying in these facilities. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, not just attorneys, to really speak up about the injustice. And then I'll just echo what you're saying on, like, the next frontier, the next battle along with immigration enforcement is First Amendment. So, like, last year was all defending the rights of Americans overseas. This year has just been standing up for the students who put everything on the line. I spent my summer in Columbia student disciplinary proceedings representing dozens of students who were peaceful protesters engaging in sit-ins, and their punishment for that was expulsion. They were unhoused, kicked out of student housing, and there are hundreds and thousands of dollars of student debts. Their careers, their lives were completely upturned. And that was the outcome of sitting in peacefully to talk about Palestinian dignity and Palestinian human rights. They have paid the heaviest price. So I think defending them is the next battle that we have, and I think we've all shown up for it.
And I just have one very brief comment, not to jump in even further. Oh, sorry, please clap. Sorry for the Jeb moment inadvertently. So I have one word with regard to advice in terms of preparation for emergency litigation, which is templates. You don't want to be sitting at your desk at 1 a.m. trying to draft something from scratch. You want to have all of your filings ready to go, your civil cover sheet, everything that you're going to need to initiate a case. It took me an hour from midnight to 1 a.m. to file a case recently. And that was with everything, all my papers ready, just filing everything on ECF. So have everything ready to go because, as other folks have noted, they're doing this stuff in the middle of the night purposefully because they don't want us to file our cases in time.
Marium, when we hear stories like what Maria just shared, the prospects look bleak when we hear about children and immigrants that are being detained. Is there any hope on the horizon? Do you have any stories to share?
I actually thought that that would be the main focus of what I talked about with you guys today, so I took notes. And in fact, I want to share with everyone in here that while our hearts have been mourning for, the removal order that we know Judge Comans has issued against Mahmoud Khalil and, ongoing detention, as I mentioned, Mario Guevara, a journalist, and so many others. My organization has been a part of an extended legal team representing Ayman Soleiman. I hope that name sounds familiar to many of you. Ohio, yes, and Ayman Soleiman was released from custody yesterday. Amazing. 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 It happened at the time that I was boarding the plane to get here. So I was super upset because I don't have capability. I'm not a tech person, and I don't have Wi-Fi on the plane. And I was like, great, everybody's going to be celebrating without me. FOMO. But it was a long-fought battle, not as long as many of these are. I do believe that there is hope, faint hope. In that, just let me give you a little bit of background about Ayman for those of you who don't know. So he is from Egypt. He worked in Egypt as a field producer, and he also worked alongside several television stations as a Spanish producer. He was doing that during the Arab Spring, and he was thrown in jail by the Egyptian authorities several times, no doubt tortured, and there is corroborative evidence of that. So many of you may have seen his video where he says, I didn't come here for freedom. I came here to escape certain death. And he was actually going in for a routine ICE check-in after having been granted asylum by USCIS. At the routine ICE check-in, the agents told him that he'd be taken into custody. And we were kind of prepared for that just because the timing of it was very strange. They had expedited the date for his check-in, and he also had a sense of it coming. So he was in custody. Like I said, we developed an extended legal team around this, and I want to share with you the background. And it's a long one. So he was granted asylum, and as I said, after he applied, after arriving in the U.S. Later, USCIS moved to terminate that asylum grant, and they issued a notice saying that he was removable, so the matter moved to immigration court. There was supposed to be a final hearing on his case next week, on September 25th, actually. We had experts ready to go. In the meantime, in order to prepare for immigration court and to fight against his custody, we continued to do every conceivable thing that we could do legally, which included a federal habeas, a TRO that was initially granted. We had it reheard, it was denied. We re-urged it. We had a Board of Immigration Appeals ready to go. That was wrongfully rejected. We filed under the APA to determine whether or not USCIS had improperly terminated the asylum grant. And we just kept doing these things over and over again. Every time they told us no, we said, no, you need to look at this again. And the thing about this case is they had alleged that Ayman, who is a chaplain at a children's hospital, had ties to terrorist groups in Egypt. By the way, none of those groups is officially an FTO, neither in Egypt nor here. So the connection that they were making was incredibly tenuous or just blatantly dishonest. The filings by the government, including the notice to appear, which would have been the charging document that put him in court, was a template, and in the wrong sense of the word, Noah, because but they used a different respondent's allegations and just changed his name. So none of the allegations that they actually had on there were pertinent to Ayman. And we were, you have a WTH.
Read your
moment.
filings before filing them.
Exactly. But the government
Not up against
like,
some really smart people all the time, which kind of makes it more fun, right? Like, sometimes you're dealing with real idiots on the other side. And
there was a footnote in a brief that showed us that the brief itself had been recycled. So if you scroll to like page 14 of the brief and you looked at footnote, you saw that this actually had nothing to do with Ayman. So, alhamdulillah, I don't know if it's that the government was scared of us. I'd like to think that that's what it is. Or they were just getting really tired of us. But who cares what the reason is? They ultimately decided that it was not a case that they were going to go forward on. And we have a video clip of him coming out of the detention center, and I can't tell you how much that does to fill your heart. So he'll be back. He's been restored to his asylum status as it was granted by USCIS, so he is an asylee.
I just want to add a quick postscript, I guess. Because this is something I've thought about a lot, about hope and what keeps us fighting. And I think back to when I was an intern at the Legal Defense Fund, and my boss told me, Noah, if you're going into civil rights, you should get used to losing. But there's this I'm Jewish, there's an old Jewish story that goes, basically, this guy is he's in jail, and the head of the town, the king, wants to execute him. And he says, Your Majesty, I can make your horse sing. And the king says, okay, well, you have a week, and if you can't make the horse sing after a week, then you'll be executed. So the guy goes back to his cell, they bring in the horse, whatever, he tries to make the horse sing, and the guy in the neighboring cell says, can you really make the horse sing? And the guy says, I don't know, but now I have a week.
I love that.
thank you for sharing that. I actually was talking to a Sunday school class, and you shared a Jewish tradition. So I've been teaching my kids the stories of the prophets. And one of the things I've been doing when I'm revisiting these stories that we all kind of grew up on is starting to think of them as like the original blueprints of human rights cases. Our tradition is replete with stories of the prophets and their loved ones facing the biggest oppressors of their time. And, these are stories that we've grown up with, but maybe we don't think of them as more than just fables of the past. But I've sort of been thinking of it as like a continuing fight against oppression in different forms. And one of the things that, is a perfect example of this moment is not new, right? Like you're saying that he was labeled as a terrorist. This is not happening today in a vacuum. Dr. Afia's story is a perfect example of that. How many of you know Dr. Afia? Right? Most Desis do, and do not start with their Wikipedia. I encourage you to look up my co-counsel Clive Stafford Smith interview with Al Jazeera on her case. And Afia's story is a perfect example of a person who was not a very political person, but is now a political prisoner because she became politicized. She was the only woman we know of to go through the CIA's rendition to torture program. Her children were with her. 2 of them were disappeared along with her. And when she resurfaced 5 years later on false charges without any evidence of attempted murder of U.S. officials, for which she got 86 years in prison, a death sentence, the media was complicit, the government was complicit in dubbing her Lady Al-Qaeda as terrorist, when a lot of what she had been doing prior to being disappeared into the the U.S. machine that was built at post 9/11, a lot of what she had been doing is something we can all relate to. She was vocal against the Bosnian genocide. She was a student activist. She was a young mother. She was brilliant. She was educated. Revisit that LA8 case, right? We talk about Mahmoud Khalil. Let's go back to the LA8 case. That was eight immigrants who were in a 20-year-old battle with the US government for the crime of hosting dinners like this where they talked about Palestinian human rights and distributed literature that was pro-Palestinian. Right? So we've been here before. We have templates, not just that we use in our lawyering, but also templates of cases. Like I always tell my interns to read a couple of cases and books because we need to understand our history in order to understand why we're in this moment and where we're headed.
Lena, can I add to that also, even though I hate to add to anything? But Maria, since you were mentioning how you handled Afia's case, and we're talking about movement lawyering, for Ayman, something that was so important was Congressman Landis's support. In addition to amazing community support, the people that rallied around him, that protested, they contributed to this decision. So we like to think of it as a legal victory, but when I'm saying allyship, and I know, again, I'm not saying anything super intelligent, we all know this, but I mean allyship in terms of us conquering the political domain, the media, community supporters. We need all of them. All of us together is what's creating change.
Abid, I want to shift focus just a little, and I want to talk about media. How do you decide when to litigate a case publicly versus resolving it quietly to protect a client? And how do you utilize media campaigns to strengthen litigation?
First of all, the client gets the first say and probably the final say on how public we go. We can walk them down. We can give them the pros and cons of going public. And if they're going to get involved in impact litigation, then they're probably, yes, we want to. If it's more of a direct representation, they'll get the decision. Then what I'll do is I'll call Linda, who's over here, call folks that have a feel of where our allies stand, what the feel is on social media, what the environment is, because you don't want to just put a case out there and a narrative out there that may not be relevant at the moment or maybe going against what somebody else is working on. So there are a lot of things to consider on the public side. It has to be rolled out right. It has to be make sure you got the right speakers lined up, the right talking points lined up. We pull in the communications department to help with that, but the final say, ultimately, it's up to the client. And we do resolve a lot of cases quietly, which you won't hear of. We resolved a case that had a seven-figure settlement for a professor that was fired, but we've never mentioned anything about it till now. We never mentioned the school or the client, but that's because that's the way the client wanted it. This person did not want it to be out there. But we moved through with it, we pushed through with it, and it was successful. So there are a lot of these things behind the scenes that won't get the media coverage. But when it is something that it's going to be impact litigation, I can assure you one of the first things we do if we decide to go public is also reach out to our partners. So we'll call the folks at CARE, we'll call folks at MPAC and others and say, hey, listen, we're about to go to public with this case. We want to give you the heads up, the talking points, the information in case your members reach out to you about it. You're in the picture of how, what the strategy is and how we're moving on it. And it's an important decision to make because oftentimes you can have a great case, you can have everything lined up, but you have a horrible spokesperson, or you have a client that just cannot talk worth anything, or wants to scream and yell and does not do himself any favors. And we've all dealt with those situations. They're not the greatest. So we try to keep those folks off camera, as far away from journalists as we can, because they end up hurting the movement a lot more than helping. But there is a lot to consider. It's never almost an instant or an immediate decision.
Noah, how do you anticipate shifts in the composition of the Supreme Court impacting litigation strategies for minorities?
So I think that we as a movement of progressive lawyers, as a movement, need to or should reconsider the way that we do impact litigation. I think for the past 40 or 50 years, typically the way impact litigation has worked is we've identified a particular policy that we want to change, and then we challenge the policy directly. And I think that now that we are in a much more hostile judicial environment, what we need to do is we need to look back at how constitutional change has been accomplished in similar times. I think back to, in high school, middle school, I learned about how, the Supreme Court and Brown v. Board created civil rights and whatever, yada, yada, and for a long time believed that that is where, that's how you do civil rights. You find the thing and you challenge it and then you win and then things are fixed. And then I graduated from high school. But there were a lot of cases leading up to Brown v. Board. There was chipping away, piece by piece, oftentimes in very, very small ways, that led to the decision in Brown v. Board. Or even more recently, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's strategy when she was at the ACLU, challenging sex discrimination, to get sex discrimination scrutinized under the 14th Amendment. She brought cases on behalf of men who were discriminated on the basis of sex. And that was how she was able to appeal to an all-male Supreme Court that was very skeptical of her claims, and she was able to effectuate that. And I think we need to revisit those strategies and deploy them now, because we see our opponents on the far right doing the same thing. We saw a Muslim plaintiff in the recent gay book case or whatever from the Supreme Court, asserting that they had a right to excuse their child from school because they don't want to have them know that gay people exist. We've seen Asian Americans being used as a wedge community in the affirmative action cases, and I think that those are they are used for nefarious purposes, but effective legal strategies that we need to revisit and deploy just as effectively or more effectively than our opponents on the right.
Thank you. Maria, what kinds of plaintiffs make the strongest lawsuits? Tell us about your vetting process and how you safeguard your plaintiffs from burnout and retaliation after stepping forward publicly.
Yeah, So my plaintiffs are some of the most deeply oppressed, traumatized, marginalized individuals that you can imagine. They have suffered immeasurable horror and have done it with such resilience and grace and consistently remain thankful to their creator and to their team that's working to support them. So there's a lot that I learned from them. I have had, because I work solo and I partner with amazing organizations, including ADC and MLFA and CARE, I have to be very selective in what I take on. But what I generally take on is a case that has the possibility of changing law and policy, or at least advancing us in the direction that we need to take this world. But I believe in movement lawyering, so I think that as lawyers, we get our education, we get our fancy degrees, and then we go into communities and start to impose our values and our worldviews and our education on other communities and tell them that, we're here to fix your problems, but we're not living their life. We don't know what their problems are because we're not experiencing those problems. So I listen to my client a lot. I mean, I'll give you the example of the Palestinians. I'm Pakistani, we grew up in going to Friday sermons and hearing Free Palestine, but did I fully appreciate what that meant, what that freedom meant and looked like and what they needed to be free of? No, I didn't. So I've learned a lot in the last 2 years, and I let my client guide me on what their needs are. I'll give you 2 examples. They tie in with the intersection between lawyering and media. So when we filed an evacuation lawsuit for a family in California, it was an elderly man. He'd gone to vacation in Gaza and he got stuck. And he's really well off. He had spent his retirement savings to buy up this acre of land in Gaza, and he was very proud to have his whole extended family, nieces, nephews, grandchildren there. And while he was waiting to evacuate, the house was demolished, and he turned that 1 acre of land into a mass grave site where he buried pieces of his grandchildren and relatives. And I talked to his daughter, who was a very low-key person, living, a quiet civilian life, and she was desperate to get her father home. And we had filed in federal court, but it takes time for court proceedings to move along. We didn't have that time for our father. And, I told her, ABC News wants to talk to you. Are you ready to do national media? And we did some quick media training. We went on ABC News together, and she did an amazing job, so much so that they ran the segment over and over again on Good Morning America. And I get off ABC, and I get a call from the FBI. And I was at the dentist's office. So I told my dentist, can you give me a second in privacy? The FBI wants to talk to me. So, they got his information, and they said that they're going to talk to their Israeli counterparts. And he was on the exit list the very next day he left Gaza. That's the story of media working, the power of media working. Alhamdulillah. But the flip side of that is there was 2 boys from Chicago, Palestinian-American young boys, 21 and 23-year-old, Barak and Hashim Alaga, and we fought hard to get them out. We did press, we did the federal court route, and while we were waiting for their evacuation, the IDF stormed into their home, tied up all of the women and children, and left them in the back alley and took all the men, including Barak and Hashim. And these boys are still at Ofer prison. It's been over a year. And there's no charges against them. They're in the most unimaginable conditions, without getting too graphic, but you can imagine what it's been like to be held in this black hole, the legal limbo that is Israeli detention system. And we, again, talked to the client. Do you want to do media? Initial reluctance. Finally, she agreed. She thought it was the only way forward to shed light on it, and media backfired. The Israeli embassy in the United States came back hard and said that these boys were complicit in October 7th. So now you've leveraged massive allegations against them that we're not going to be able to fight because Israeli courts are not fair. So we've dialed it back. The boys' story is now on pause. Their fate is on pause. And as a lawyer, there's nothing I can do because I have to respect the family's wishes. So it's a delicate dance. I have to be selective in who my plaintiffs are, but I also have to be very mindful of what the plaintiffs' needs are.
Abid, we've seen a spike in doxing, leading to Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians losing their jobs. What advice do you have in handling these cases, and are there any legal remedies?
Look, these are, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. These are the cases we are starting to see, and the doxing is real, and the threats are real. And look, I could get up here and say, watch what you say, be careful online, don't say 1, 2, 3, but then it's, going against everything we've been saying about freedom of speech and expressing yourself and putting your beliefs out there, right? So it is a very delicate walk and to do, and everybody's got different circumstances. Everybody's in a different position. My advice is this, and I mean, this may not fit directly into the legal, and you're probably not expecting this, but this ties into the whole issue of economic empowerment, where when we are tied in as a community, or when you're tied in financially to a corporation or to an employer, they're gonna have a say in what their social media policies are, or what they can tell their employers what to say or what to do. It's hard, and we can fight these cases. We do represent these individuals, but it is difficult. But I'll tell you, October 7th through November, December, we were getting a lot of cases for people that were fired and let go. But about January 2024, we began getting a lot of phone calls about our small and minority business development program. And what we began seeing were individuals who were fired from certain fields coming together to open their own entities. So in Minnesota, we had a few nurses that were fired. Well, they came together and opened their own Traveling Nurses Corporation. In California, we had a few attorneys that were fired. They came together and opened their law firm. And I think that, honestly, is the next step. And I know that's not directly related to legal, but if we're going to cut the ties of anybody telling us what to say, what to do, what to post, you have to control your own economic empowerment where you're working. We have to employ our own. We have to give our own internships, our own opportunities, our own loans, our own banking. The list can go on and on. This is the only way to break completely free from that. And take a look at Canary Mission. Look at who Canary Mission and these individuals are putting on their site. They're not going after the millionaires and the billionaires and the business owners. They're going after people that they know we can get fired, because if we fire them, we're going to hurt them. We're going to hurt them financially. We're going to put them in a bad position. But if we can overcome that through our programming, through working together and building that part out of our community, that is, when they're not going to be able to tell us what to say. They're going to have no control over anything. So that's like the long game on that issue. In the short term, everybody make the decision that you think is best for you. You're going to know your employer. If you get called down or you post something that you feel like you're about to get doxxed or they're about to report you, give your HR person a heads up. Give your boss a heads up, like, hey, this is coming down. Here's what I meant by it. It's no big deal. Reach out to CARE or ADC or a private attorney also, for some support. But if it gets to the level of, they put your home address out there, they put your school, your kid's school information out there, that's dangerous. That's where you need an immediate lawyer and probably some law enforcement involvement to protect you and take those seriously. But again, everybody has your own unique set of circumstances. Just protect yourself. Go with your gut feeling. If you feel like this post is worth it, then go with it. If you're like, your post is not going to have, free Palestine on its own. Like, you could find another way to say it. Then you got to make that decision as well. So really, it's going to come down to what you feel you need to do on that front.
And just very briefly, under no circumstances should you ask ChatGPT for legal advice. No, I mean this. I mean, not only would the advice not be good, but it is not privileged. It is not protected. The government can and will use it against you. Talk to an actual lawyer.
Marium, I think a lot of us would like to hear from you and about your experience being on the bench. What is your advice for law students and attorneys that are considering joining the bench?
We need a whole nother panel for that conversation. When I started my government career, I thought I was doing good work. It's a difficult thing to reconcile with in retrospect. I mean, I think I was honest, but I think I was naive. And that's not to discourage anyone from the path. I always kind of envisioned myself standing up against the American flag really proudly. You know how we have all government officials do that. And to be honest, it was Gaza that brought me here. I don't know where for that if I would still be operating in the darkness. So advice that I would give that is the most heartfelt, genuine, and very basic advice that I can give is to thine own self be true. Do the deep searching that's necessary to know who you are and what you stand for. For me, there was a lot of vanity involved in my career choices. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but that is the truth. I felt like I had worked for it, I had earned it. What a privilege, people say, all rise. And, I now have these moments where I'm grocery shopping and I'm crying in the produce section because I'm looking at tomato thinking, how can I give this to a child in Gaza? I'm taking a shower and I'm crying, thinking, I don't deserve this hot water on my body. How do I give this to a mother in Gaza? I was shopping for my daughter's wedding, and it was actually the day that Anas al-Sharif was murdered. And she was really stoic, on what should have been one of the most happiest times of our lives. And she said, I don't want you to buy any jewelry for me because Anas al-Sharif he's been killed. So I think I say all of that to encourage you to do the excavation that's necessary, the excavation of your soul. Do you want to be a person who is taking on Beitar, Canary Mission, the IOF? Are you wanting to bury AIPAC? Because most likely, if that's who you are, you're not going to find happiness as an immigration judge. I think that depending on what state you live in, and if it's a jurisdiction that has a strong civil liberties infrastructure like California maybe, but if you're in Texas, you got to be friends with Ted Cruz. So I think we should all say boo to that. But, you know, dig deep, be true to what your ideals are. And I have this written down, of course, to tell you what should be your guiding principles in determining whether or not you want to pursue a judgeship or whether or not you want to pursue what it is that we do. History teaches us that conscience is rarely convenient. Muhammad Ali stood against the Vietnam War and was condemned, even stripped of his title before the world came to see the justice of his stand. Fred Korematsu defied Japanese-American internment, branded a traitor then, but honored as a hero today. And you all know the list, right? Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, freedom riders, people who were once dismissed as radicals. We are radicals in this room, and we are proud to be radicals. Radicals rarely become judges, and if they do, it's not a smooth ride. So when we look at ourselves, you know, are we willing to risk our comfort, our reputation, and even our freedom? And in so doing, do we believe that we bend the arc of justice? On which scale do you find yourself? Is it in a government job? Is it as a judge? Or is it, again, doing the work that we're doing here? So we face setbacks, it's slow progress, but I think we want to remember that movements are built brick by brick. That's what history has taught us time and again. And history will place us alongside those who chose conscience when it mattered most.
So I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions? I saw your hand go up first. Go ahead.
A lot of the Republicans were coming off the Make America Great victory, focusing on America first. And we saw that as an opportunity, very strong language that they were, for once, saying that they weren't going to be Israel first. And we saw that maybe if we could engage, then we could keep them on that America first and separate them from the Zionist influence. And sadly, we found very challenging relations with the advocates who wanted to really be just continuing to condemn the president and not engage with the president. And I wondered whether or not you all feel that that was a missed opportunity, especially when you see people like Candace Owens, sadly, even Charlie Kirk, who were making, evolutions in their thinking. And at least with respect to Charlie Kirk, got cut short before he fully came over. But surely Tucker Carlson has made a total 180 degree. Do you think we should really be more engaging even now to hopefully remind the people of the America First agenda that would perhaps allow us to have a more balanced foreign policy and policies in other regards as well?
Thank you for your question.
I mean, those efforts are happening. So, we know of engagement that it is happening with everyone from, Tucker Carlson, Thomas Massey, and I think there's a lot more outreach and back and forth with, the Republicans and conservatives now than there was under Trump's first term. So it is happening. We got to be mindful of, the different factors that are at play and the different levels of concern groups will have. But I think ultimately we're getting to a point where there is a realignment going on, and there is conversations going on with these folks. So it's happening. It's definitely happening.
I see we have 30 seconds. Do you all want one more question? Let's, go ahead.
In ADC, where are the Arab Christian or the Christian Arab? Where they are?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very diverse membership. I mean, we are a secular organization, but most of ADC. We have, Ms. Sohaila Ayman is here. She's our new national organizer. She starts officially on October 1. She was just out in Texas a few weeks ago and spent some time out there, so we could definitely talk afterwards. But as far as, look, I'll tell you, the makeup of our membership, I mean, we see support from Muslim, from Christian, from everybody. Like, it's not, we don't see it one way or another. We don't ask about it, but we know who our membership is, and everybody's out there supporting the cause, regardless of religion or what their background is.
Jazakumullah khair for such an awesome panel. That concludes our session. Jazakumullah khair.